on today's Story Beat.
Well, perseverance conquers, first of all. So you have to have that, figure out a way to get in, be a good, dependable person in everything that you do, and bring all your life experiences to it, work hard and just be open to all the possibilities of the things that can happen. Now, if you're dead set on being an actor, then don't get waylaid into other things because, you'll get used to the money. If you become a crew member and you start making that kind of money, it's very difficult to give that money up. So stick to your cause, whatever it may be.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, the actor and writer Joe Coyle, has appeared in such movies as Jack Reacher with Tom Cruise, Promised Land with Matt Damon, Frances McDormand, Emily Blunt, and John Krasinski, and Where'd You Go, Bernadette, starring Cate Blanchett. Joe hails from Sewickley, Pennsylvania. He's been a paperboy, journalism student, university newspaper writer, photographer, magazine junior executive, TV film actor, writer, producer, a bartender, landman, and salesman. So he's heard and told his share of stories. His most recent work, titled Just Trash, appeared in Roger Williams University's literary magazine, Mount Joy. His story, Just Outside Lisbon, appeared in Oregon Greystone Press, and in 2017, a series of his essays were published in Boomers, edited by a favorite StoryBeat guest, Robert Crane. Joe continues to write, working on short stories, poetry, screenplays, and his memoir. So for all those reasons and many more, it's my great pleasure to be joined on StoryBeat today by the multi-talented Joe Coyle. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve. It's really great to be here and talking to you.
It's a great pleasure to have you, believe me. So let's go back in time a little bit. I'm wondering, at what point in your life, how old were you when the showbiz or the entertainment bug first bit you?
Well, when I finally pulled the trigger, I was not a young man.
Okay.
I was, I was late 30s. And I had a real job and was doing fairly well. And it just got to the point where it just didn't mean that much to me anymore. And I said to myself, when I die, I don't want on my grave, the best thing that they could say is, well, he was a heck of a salesman. And nothing against salesmen. I mean, obviously nothing, the world revolves because of salesmen selling one thing or another. And, but it just wasn't what I really wanted to do. I felt like I had something to say, and I went to journalism school, and I just wasn't doing anything creative at all. So
you had unfulfilled dreams. Did you have a dream from much earlier in life to do that?
Oh, yeah. When I was a kid, my brothers and I, everyone used to play, Army and cops and robbers and stuff like this, but we would take it to, it would be episodic. So from one day to the next, Robin Hood would be on a different adventure or something like this. And,
sure.
And I always felt like I was staying in character, and I got kind of a little bit, upset that other people, I would talk to them in character, the next day when I first saw them, and they were like, "Hey, did you see Get Smart last night?" or whatever it was. And I'm like, Get Smart doesn't exist, but yeah, so, we used to make bows and arrows out of, sticks and string and, stuff like that. And we had everything but Maid Marian. So
you were playing characters from a very young age.
Oh, yeah, we did. I remember after Alamo came out, we turned my garage into the Alamo. And, one guy was Davy Crockett and the other guy was Sam Houston. And, it was just cool stuff.
Did you do any damage to your parents' garage?
Oh, our garage was pretty downtrodden to begin with. It made a good Alamo. Put it that way. It made a very good Alamo.
So who did you look at, even as a young man, and look to and say, wow, that's a really great actor, actress, whatever, and I would like to think of myself maybe doing what they do? Who did you look up to?
That's a great question. And I kind of had an answer, but it changes over time when you get into it. In particular, there are times when you're like, I can't believe I thought that person was great, or oh my gosh, that person I never really like. Brad Pitt. I mean, gosh, I mean, when I was younger and he was younger, he was just a pretty boy. But I mean, he's obviously a lot more than a pretty boy. But Brad Pitt is not my guy, all time guy. My all time guy, and the guy who I wanted to be when I grew up, was William Holden.
William Holden.
I loved William Holden. Stalag 17, Bridge on the River Kwai. I mean, I could watch Bridge on the River Kwai as many times as you show it to me. And then later in life, I guess because I was younger and it probably wasn't on TV, Sunset Boulevard. I mean, my gosh, I mean,
And then the Wild Bunch.
oh yeah, it just goes on and on and on. And as a writer, a wannabe writer, kind of just like, what was his name? Joe, I'll never think of his name in that movie. But anyway, he was a writer who just couldn't get anything written. And that's why, if you remember, he takes off in his car because the repo guy was chasing him, and the tire hits the curb and he ends up, at the mansion.
Absolutely.
And it's a great, and with the monkey and the, just a great story.
Well, it's one of the great movies of all time. Billy Wilder, how many great movies did he make? And so you were looking up to William Holden. Did you think to yourself you could be William Holden someday?
As I grew older, I felt like, I started having kind of, classic movie star kind of looks, tall, dark hair, kind of sharp features, more like manly kind of features, you know what I mean? And I remember an aunt told me I looked like, she says, Joey, you look like Mannix. This is when I was like 13, and I'm like, yeah, okay, sure.
That's Mike Connors. If you remember, those of you that are a little younger than we are, you might not know who we're talking about. But Mannix was a very popular television series about a detective, went all the way back in the 60s, and it starred a guy named Mike Connors, and it was very popular.
It was great.
It was a great show. I very much enjoyed it. And so did you then at some point in your life say, you're 38 years old and I want to be in movies and write and do all these things? Did you go get training for it?
I did. I was living in New York City, and I was in an apartment month to month, and I was subletting it from a woman who was a dancer on Broadway who was traveling with the show. And she said to me that as long as you understand that at some point the show may get canceled, or I may decide to come home or whatever, if you're that, if you can move that quickly, that's the deal. So I got a great deal in this great apartment on the Upper West Side, and then right around that time, she said she was coming home, and I'd have to find another place, and I knew I'd never get a deal like that. So I just started thinking about everything. I'm like, you know what? It's time to just end this little charade here. And I moved back to Philadelphia, which is where I was from, and I rented a row house in a neighborhood that was not so good, but it was even less expensive than New York City. And I started taking classes in Center City, Philadelphia.
Acting classes.
I knew I could write. I mean, I had to get better at it. I had to do it. But acting, I didn't really know anything about. I had been asked to be in, a photo shoot, because I was I sold printing. So the people that my clients would say, hey, do you want to be in this photo shoot? We need a guy. A guy looks good in a suit, and this and that and the other thing. So then a couple commercials here and there, just like people just asked me to do them. I'm like, yeah, sure. So I knew I kind of had a look that could be marketable. So I just need to learn how to do it. So I went to a little theater company in downtown Philadelphia called the Wilma Theater, and took classes there, and just like really started from scratch. And then the crazy part is I would go around to theaters that were, some of them were community theaters, other ones were like real theaters. And they would list, there was a publication in Philadelphia that I can't even remember the name, that listed all the auditions and things like that. And I used to go to these things, and I mean, these are like real actors. And I was there, and I get up there, and I was just dying. But I was so naive, I didn't even know I was dying. Anyway.
I want to disabuse you of that notion right now. You were a real actor even then. The difference is you weren't being paid.
Exactly. Oh, was I an actor? I was pretending to know what I was doing.
And so did you also have the dream of being a writer at the same time?
Well, I said to myself, and no one told me this, I just said to myself, I think that if you get into that business, I think that you can grow in many ways. I mean, there's been stories for many years that, actors would write and writers would act and direct and this, that, and the other thing. And I thought that as long as I got in, I thought I'd find a home. And I felt like, not to be cocky or anything, but I thought I had the look that I could get in as an actor, figure it out, get parts, and then go from there and say, okay, now I'm in. Now I have this writing ability, and I could work on that. And I just always found a way to kind of organize things. So I figured I could. That's producing, and I felt like I could do that.
So
as well.
I'm going to guess that you, having also been a salesman, helped you to sell yourself.
Yeah, I mean, yes.
You had skills and techniques that you could use in terms of how to talk to somebody. You could somehow sway your influence on them through the ability to speak.
I think so. And also over time, when I first started selling, I mean, I was like everyone else. I was scared to death. I was scared of my own shadow. That's another thing. When I was a kid, I mean, even though I liked doing these things where, you didn't have to audition for it or stand up in front of people, you're doing it for this fake camera or this fake audience that was out there, so I could do that all day long. But I remember public speaking classes where I would freeze. And plus I was a blusher. I really, really blushed. I would glow. So I'd be up there trying to give a speech and stammering and stuttering. And then I was like, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
So do you think you were being embarrassed by yourself, or what was it?
I think this might be true of a lot of actors or creative people, is they feel like maybe they might have a little bit of an innate sense of bad self-esteem. I think what I was doing was trying to overcome this fear of everything, so I just kept doing it and doing it and doing it and just got better at it. And so that's what I did in sales. And then, when you get a little bit of positive response, that does a lot for you.
Sure, it does.
A little bit more positive response. But like anything else, you get to a certain level, and then all of a sudden you get shut down, and then you get put into your place a little bit. And then you decide, somewhere inside you decide, okay, I'm going to work harder, do something different to get to the next level, because I want to be at the next level. I have to do something. What do I do? And the first thing you have to do is knock on that door again.
You have to have confidence to begin, and then you've got to maintain that confidence.
Yes.
And you had that by having already done other things in life. You came to this relatively late in life. A huge number of people that have careers in show business start as very young people. They don't start later in life. You start in your late 30s. That's pretty late to start as an actor.
It is. And I had people telling me, you're crazy. You have no idea what you're going into. Do you know anyone who's an actor, like a real actor? Do you know what they've gone through? I mean, it's just the negativity from people who I thought were pretty good friends. But then once again, from people who, like my family members were very supportive. And then some friends were supportive, but other ones were just not so. And I was like, wow, where's that coming from? And
well, again, I'm not to harp on this too much, but again, as a salesperson, you learned to take the negatives, the no's, and somehow live with them so that you could get a percentage of sales out of the numbers of people that you spoke to, correct?
Yeah. And I never looked at it like a numbers game. And I'm not saying that for any other reason than I think there are people that are much more pragmatic than me. And they'll just go, well, if you get 2% and you see 100 people, that means you're going to get 2 of them. And then, all things like that. I just went into everyone like, I don't know, like this is a challenge. I'm going to figure out what they want, and I'm going to see if I can, make it happen.
But you had a built-in ability at that point to overcome the negatives. When somebody said no, you'd either shine it on or you shrug your shoulders or whatever. You didn't dwell on that and go off and cry in a corner. You actually moved forward. True?
Yeah, I did. Yes. But back to the crying in the corner. For some reason, I came up with a philosophy. No one told me this, but I think it's kind of apparent that it's okay to, like, when you get shot down, whatever it may be, and the further you go in this business, the bigger the stakes are, and the more you kind of want it, and so the pain, heartache when you don't get it is real and deeper. So I've always said to myself, it's okay to cry over spilt milk for a day. Now, sometimes it was more than a day, but then it's over. Then you come back, or you don't. You divert. You do something else. But it's okay. Anything like this, anything really creative, if you don't get upset over not getting what you set out to do, I think you have a right, and I think most people do get upset. So accept the fact that you're upset, and then move on.
Right. I think that's a very wise way to look at it, because you're not going to succeed on every time you go out for an audition.
No.
Just doesn't happen. When did you start to seriously consider being a writer at the same time? Was it around your late 30s or was it prior to that?
I used to write a lot, but never try to get it published. I always wrote, so that when I was traveling, I was either reading who I thought were good writers, they were my favorite writers, and I would have a notebook and I would write. I would just like write scenes or whatever it may be. You know, even to this day, I drive my wife crazy. I have boxes, because there's all notebooks, of half-written stories, scenes, this, that. She goes, why do you keep all that? Why do you have so many story files? And it's like, it's almost like a security blanket. I mean, I don't know if I'll ever get to it, but I do think about those stories, and those characters and those situations pop up in a maybe more refined or distilled way in things that I write now. So anyway, I was always doing that. When I went to LA, one of the reasons I went was a friend of mine and I were going to. He was working on ER as Anthony Edwards' stand-in. And I got to be good buddies with him, which that's a whole nother episode. We decided to go out there. He said he didn't want to return for the next season, but he said he would, but he wanted to get something accomplished. And he said, why don't we finish that script that we're talking about? So I drove out there with him, and we came up with all these plots and plans that we were going to do. And the story never got written, but that's okay, because 1,000 other stories haven't got written. But that was the reason that I went out there. And once I got out there, then I start writing more and more, because at that point I started working on ER, and I started seeing how stories were developed and things, especially for episodic television. And then I started doing features. It was very educational. I feel very fortunate, because most people at the age of 38, they're not done, isn't the word, but they're set in their path, and you know, they have families and commitments and mortgages and car payments and all this other stuff. I had none of that. So the way I looked at it was, I'm going to school, I'm learning filmmaking and all aspects of it. And it was a great time. And like I said, not many people at the age of 30, at that point, 40, whatever it was, had that opportunity. And that's the way I looked at it. And it's worked out great.
Well, many people, by the time they're in their late 30s, they've got a family and they're trying to just keep their head above water with financially, so they have to keep working, and that makes it prohibitive to go out there and try what you did. But as you say, you didn't have those encumbrances, so it made it a little easier for you.
Yeah, and that was never the plan. I never sat down and said, this is what I'm going to do. It worked out that way. And
so how long were you at it before you thought to yourself, you know what, I am actually pretty good at this, and I really do think I can have a little bit of a career at it in some way? Was there a point where you thought to yourself, yeah, this is for me permanently?
Well, permanently it gets to kind of a point about my creative process. If you don't mind me diverting a little bit.
Of course, please.
Yeah. So I think I taught some acting classes here in Pittsburgh, and it was acting for film. And there was a guy in the class who was pretty good, and he had done nothing but theater. And so in my acting for film class, at least part of the time, I talked about the business of the business, and how, you know, you audition, and then you're lucky you're put on hold, and they don't know what day you're shooting, and this and that and the other thing. And this guy was perplexed, and he just said, how can you do that? And I said, well, I mean, you do theater. And he goes, yeah, but theater. And I said, theater takes up a lot more time. And he goes, yeah, but I know when my rehearsals are. I know when the show is, and I know the whole thing. You're telling me that, and I have a job. I'm like, how can I do that? And I said, well, I'm not saying that you can or you can't do it, but I'm saying that in order to work in film and television, your life has to be open to the whims of this crazy business. And if your life is not set up that way, then it may not work. But then on the flip side, I said to the folks in the class, and anyone else who I've ever talked to about it, is that you should not be just an actor. You should be open to life. If you're just an actor, then, you know, you're walking around, you're talking about, you know, it's almost like waiting for Guffman. It's like, you know, there's more out there than like there's life. And so you live life, and you live it to the fullest, the best you can. And in doing that, you're meeting all these peoples and all these situations that if you're journaling it even mentally, emotionally, psychologically, then you have something to bring when it comes time to audition and then perform. So you have to, so permanently, I have not been able to do it permanently because eventually I did get married and I did have kids. And so it's been kind of a hodgepodge. And it's,
When I say permanently, I don't mean that this is everything. What I mean is that you have committed yourself to being an actor probably for as long as you can be an actor, whether you're doing it every day or not.
well, my kids are, my youngest, I have two, is in his senior year, and he'll be off to college, God willing, or at least, on his own and in some way. And so my wife and I have been looking like, so what are we going to do now? What are we going to do? And so a friend of mine and I have been getting together for coffee, and I explained to him that, I'm in a little bit different situation than him. He doesn't have kids. I said, now I'm going to be freed up, and I'm really looking to do something. And I haven't been looking to do a play for quite some time. And so we started brainstorming about a play, and we found one that we like. It's a two-man play, and it's not, battleships aren't blowing up, and there's not, a big light show. It's two guys who meet for coffee. The title of it is Years to the Day, and it was written by a gentleman by the name of Alan Barton, who I guess at this point owns the Beverly Hills Playhouse. My friend Dylan McMahon studied under him, and so he contacted him and said, do you mind if we do your play here in Pittsburgh? And he agreed to do it. And he said that he'd actually come out and direct it if we want him to. So sometime in the next, it's going to be in 2024, we're going to be doing a play, a two-man play. And so, yeah, permanently, maybe not, but
you have it in your bloodstream, though, don't you?
Well, I do. I just feel like, when we left LA, I felt like I left something on the table. You know what I mean? I worked hard and start getting auditions, and I got an agent, and I wasn't with any of the big ones or anything, but I was schlepping around like everyone else does, and was kind of in the game and found a way to be able to afford it. And we owned a house, which was kind of unheard of for. My wife was a production assistant at the time, so a rising actor and a production assistant buying a house in LA, that was a big milestone. So she, by the way, now is a second assistant director, and she's quite successful at what she does. And so we're a film family. We're as Bob Crane would say, we're carnies.
We're carnies. And then the writing part of it, you continued to write at the same time. Do you find that your acting work has infused the writing in some way, and vice versa? Has the writing infused the acting in some way?
Yeah, I'd say back and forth. When I was in one of my very first acting classes, the instructor said to me, because we had to do a scene, an exercise that was a memory thing, and she just said, you draw such great pictures with your words that have you ever considered writing? And I said, actually, I am a writer, and I'm trying to act. So, and then she said, actors make good writers, writers make good actors.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think maybe because, and this is the hard part about both, is that I think in order to be really, really good at it, I mean, you could be a comic book writer, and I'm not knocking comic book writers, but I mean, you could be, because some graphic novels are really deep, but I'm talking about you can write very surface kind of dialogue in situations that are very, or you can start digging deep into dark places. And I don't mean like creating horror stories necessarily, or just weird stuff for the sake of weird stuff.
You're talking about the depth of character of various characters.
Deep into a person's soul. And in order to do that as an actor, I think you have to go to dark places in order to, play a role, some roles well. And then as a writer, if you don't do that, then you're just putting words on the paper, and, it's not really doing anything. And you can get published. I mean, people do get published, but I mean, if you really want to explore the human condition, then I think you have to dig deep, and you have to do the same thing for acting as well.
So, all right, where do you find most of your story ideas? Do you have a go-to place, or do they just come from everywhere?
Well, lately, as an exercise, I started looking at the saying the picture's worth 1,000 words. So I said to myself, wouldn't it be great if you could just do give yourself 1,000 word limit? So you take a photo or a picture or a drawing or something like this, and then you come up with 1,000 words about that this image inspired you to write. The challenge is keeping it under 1,000 words. I mean, it's difficult because once you get going,
Yep. It's hard.
It's hard. So, but that's one thing. And then, music sometimes. And then, one time I saw a guy, I pulled into a convenience store one night, coming home. It was a sales thing. And there was a cop sitting there, and he was on his break, and he was staring out this window. I mean, like staring out the window. And it wasn't like he was watching anything. He was gone. He was not.
He had a 1,000-yard stare on, yeah?
Yeah, and I'm like, that's really interesting. And months later, I found out that there was a stop sign on an off-ramp right outside of that where a young girl was hit and killed. And whether the two had anything connected or not, I drew up a little story about this cop and his connection with the situation. So, some people have that low places, have that something about them. And so I try to find it all different places. Many writers draw from their background. So I guess in that the story that you mentioned, Just Outside Lisbon, that's autobiographical in many ways. I took different pieces of my life and mishmashed them together and came up with this situation where this guy had to go to Lisbon, Ohio, or just outside of Lisbon, Ohio. And he drives there, and he's driving there. He is flashing back to, it's almost like he's questioning how the heck he ever got there. But in answering the question to himself, he was informing the reader, so the reader could say, why am I interested in this? Why should I be interested in this guy's driving to Lisbon, Ohio? I mean, who the heck cares about Lisbon, Ohio? By the time he gets to Lisbon, Ohio, the hope is that people care and are interested enough to know what is going to happen when he gets there. That was the hook on that one. And then Just Trash, I just had this idea of an old landfill and in a neighborhood in a place like Philadelphia where I grew up. And so I mishmash a bunch of characters that I knew growing up and situations, and put them all together. And I honestly had no idea where it was going to come from. I'll be honest with you. I just like the title, Just Trash. I just kept going. And so I just came up with this situation where the term just trash comes, so it has nothing to, the landfill just happens to be this thing in the area. And so the term just trash ends up being used, and it kind of ties into the landfill in some way. And I think I did a pretty good job with that. So that another one, there's a sign, it's actually in Lisbon, Ohio, that has a very specific meaning to travelers, maybe in Western Pennsylvania and Ohio and West Virginia. And so this sign takes on this meaning to this person who we meet that has nothing to do with all those thoughts that get conjured up in the person's head who drives by that sign.
What does it say?
It's mail pouch tobacco.
Mail pouch tobacco.
Yeah.
Is that's specific to Western Pennsylvania? I thought that was nationwide.
I've only seen it in Western Pennsylvania. I mean, it could be. I just know I've seen a ton of them in Ohio, West Virginia, and Western Pennsylvania, but I don't know if I've seen them in it. I've driven across country more than I should admit, and I don't know if I've ever seen them other than here. But I could be wrong. I mean, it's probably a national brand, but in Western Pennsylvania, you see them on barns and things like that. I mean, it was a great marketing idea.
Yes, that is a great marketing idea. Do you tend to write a little bit every day?
Well, funny you should ask that. When Bob Crane asked me to get involved in that series of essays, he gave me and others subjects to write about. And he wanted to hear what all these people, diverse people in his life, had to say about these subjects. I wanted to write the best thing, and I was just like delaying. And I just said to myself, this is the way to do it. You get up in the morning before everyone else and you write about that subject. It doesn't have to be good, doesn't have to be anything. You have to write. And what ended up happening was I would write one day, first draft, second day I would edit, third day maybe, and then I go to the next one. And I kept going, and it wasn't always as it wasn't assembly line, because there were things that would come up, But as long as I had that pressure on myself to do that, then I did, and I did pretty good work. And with these short stories that I wrote, once I get, writers feel guilty when they don't write every day, and because I have to, this is my job, I have to do this. I read, I can't even remember, there's more books about writing than there are hairs on my head, but in this one book, it said that don't pick up the pen or go to the computer until you build the images. Build the images in your head. Dream. I think that's what it was. You dream about them, dream about them, dream about them, and then there's a point where they hatch. And if you go and try to hatch them before they're ready, you're just going to get into writer's block, and you're going to write bad stuff, and you're going to get discouraged. So sit and dream and let them germinate, if you will. There's different ways to do it. There's as many writers, there's different ways, but I kind of like that idea. And with that said, there's a great idea that I have. I have boxes of ideas, as I told you earlier, but this one is really, really pretty cool that I really like, and it's for a person more my age who's comes to realize certain things about himself at this point, and with pieces of the past coming back into play.
What are the things when you're thinking about a story and then ultimately writing that story? What are the things for you that makes a story good? What makes a good story good?
Well, I think what makes a good story good is very simple. Think of yourself at a cocktail party, okay? And it's early, so people aren't all looped, but you meet someone and you find some kind of common ground, and you said, that reminds me, I was in Austin, Texas once when I was in my early 20s, and I went to the Driscoll Hotel, and this happened and that happened, and I met this guy. And if the person you're talking to, if their eyes turn away from you and they start looking over your shoulder or something like that, then the story isn't any good. So, or you lost them, something happened. So when I first write a story, I'm almost like I'm vomiting information out, and then you go back and you whittle away and whittle away and whittle away, and maybe move some things around. And the idea is that you're keeping that person at the cocktail party interested in talking to you, rather than going to get another drink or hors d'oeuvres or talk to the other person on the other side of the room. And that's pretty much as simple as it gets. Is that because if someone goes to a theater and spends all that money, and they sit down and they start thinking about work or whatever it may be, or their family obligations, I mean, the movie's a failure. That's
A failure.
In my mind, that's
absolutely.
They could not keep the person in the dream. In the written word, it's the same thing. If that person is reading your book and they're not compelled to go further, then you lost them. So there's a structure to it, and I can't tell you exactly what it is, other than you have to keep the person in the dream.
So it was the great director Alfred Hitchcock who was the master of suspense. But the truth of the matter is, all great stories are suspense stories. If the audience wants to know what's going to happen next, then you have them hooked and you retain the hook. If they want to know what's going to happen next, as soon as they know what's going to happen next, or they lose interest in what's going to happen next, as a writer or a director, you're cooked.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Are you an outliner? Do you work your stories out ahead of time, or do you just go?
For short stories, I just go. For screenplays, I go, and then I start realizing that this has to fit into somewhat of a structure. So at that point, that's when I start.
Movies are all about architecture, and the structure of the screenplay is very critical.
Yeah. So I start taking out the cards, and I start doing that. My son, he's 18. When he was very young, I mean, he used to make movies with his iPhone. Actually, he would take our iPhone then, and he would make these movies. And he had this sense of vision, like setting up a shot. He had a great sense. I mean, he really did. And then he started cutting them together, and then he would, like, you get inserts of hands and feet and like whatever it may be. It's really cool stuff. And it was flawed for sure, but coming from the mind of a 10-year-old and 11-year-old and 12, and you could see him growing up and getting better. But he started writing screenplays too, and because he wanted to do things, as real as he could. And so that's how it just reminded me, in order to stay on track, get out the big board, put the cards on it, shuffle them around, and come up with your story. And that's a really good way to do it for film.
Do you think that there are common themes throughout your work?
Common themes?
Or do you think it's quite varied?
I think it's pretty common. And my challenge, and to tell you the truth, I've been told that at times this doesn't seem like your voice. And I haven't told these people that, but what I've been trying to do at times, like for instance, I wrote a story a little while ago where it was totally from a woman's point of view. I've seen some great short story writers do that, where you forget in the middle of the story that a guy is writing this. I mean, you're so enthralled by this woman's actions and thoughts and things. It's really pretty cool. I think you really have to be a pretty good craftsman. Women, I probably am thinking, have done it for decades, if not centuries, because maybe at some point it was considered more of a man's world, and who cares about the woman's point of view. There are exceptions, I'm sure, but nonetheless, so I was trying to do that. So I'm trying to expand, because it's easy you can fall into the trap, I think, that all you're doing is writing the same character in a different body, in a different place, in a different time. You know what I mean? So I think that's my exercise. And so these things may not be bestsellers. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but they're even though they're finished pieces, they're kind of exercises in me trying to think outside of my little world.
What you're saying is that you have the ability to think unlike you, and that's what a writer needs to do. It's not just you.
Yes, and with that said, in my acting class, what I did, and I think I was more successful with young actors than older actors, because the older you get, the more you're set in your ways. But what I would do is an exercise where I told the students they had to write a bio of a character, and you name the character, you name where they're from, what their family situation is, how many siblings do they have, are their parents divorced, separated, madly in love with one another, where do they go to school, what are their hopes and dreams, where do they hope to go to school, do they have jobs, what kind of car do they drive, the whole thing. The more, the better. And between this class and the next class, I want you to come in and have that bio, and then you're going to read the bio, and then I'm going to interrogate you. I'm going to be a policeman. I'm going to interrogate you for something that I'm not even going to tell you what it is. And it's your job is to answer these questions as that person, and I'm going to film you. And it really was cool. And I think as an act, if you have time, as a day player, you really don't have that much time, but you do have time to do this when you're auditioning. So you get your sides, and then you get the breakdown. The breakdown is, for me, it's a white middle-aged guy, and he's, playing a dad or a cop or this, that, and the other thing. Well, in order to be truthful in the audition, and this is the only way I think emotionally you can get through an audition, is because whether you get it or not is up to factors that are just don't even make any sense.
Well, they're way beyond your actual control.
Way behind your control. So the way to get through this emotionally and leave and say, I felt good about that, is that you went in there as this character, and you played that character with these words in your mouth to the best of your ability. Now, at that point, then you might get a little guidance or direction from the casting person, or if you're meeting with a director or showrunner or whatever, at that point, they might say, that's really good, but we saw this person with a little bit more edge, or a little bit less edge, or a little bit more feminine, or a little bit more, meatheady, or a little bit more whatever. And then now you got to dig into that reservoir of things that you saw and experienced, and oh yeah, they want me to be like that guy I hung around with in high school, who is just an idiot, sits at the end of the bar, so that then you come up with something.
It sounds to me like you purposefully spend a lot of time thinking about your auditions.
Ideally, yeah, but in life, it gets back to life. Life has a way of
intruding.
But yeah, I mean that's the plan. I taught at Carnegie Mellon for one semester, acting for the camera. With those folks, they were seniors, so they've been through this is their fourth year last semester. These guys and girls were finely tuned machines. I mean, they were just real. Their money was well spent. So with them, it doesn't take a whole lot of, let's say, effort or whatever, they could just turn on a dime. The things that they would do between takes, they would see it one of their takes, and one guy said, I didn't realize, I did this with my face. And I said, well, that's kind of one of the reasons that we're doing this, is because, in order to make a living, it'd be nice if you could get cast in a TV show or a movie. It's not all about stage, which that school is primarily for. So anyway, the next take, it went away. You know what I mean?
Because they have all those other skill sets that they've learned, and they can be very adaptive and flexible with those skill sets.
Yeah, I have to say, they were finely tuned acting machines.
So once you have gone through the audition process and you have booked a role and you're going to be on set, what is the first thing you do with the script, aside from reading it? What is your first take on things? What do you look for?
Well, if it's a film, then everything is kind of, new, and there's a lot of, I don't know, I guess guesswork or educated guesswork as to how this is going to fit in with the other actors. And generally, for a day player, you kind of take backstage a little bit to the stars if you're in a scene with a star. So you have to just stay really loose, if you will. But with that said, on Promised Land, and that scene I did with Matt Damon and gosh, I can't remember his name. Great character actor, was in this TV show Oz, and that was just like, there was no one was expected to take a back seat. Everyone played the role. I was the CEO, so I was the big dog, and they expected me to play the big dog, and that was really, really, really pretty cool. But that's Matt Damon. Matt Damon is just a super nice guy and a great actor, and he gets what's going on. He doesn't have to be the big dog in the room, and his character in that, he wasn't. He was kind of the low man on the totem pole, someone they were hiring to come in and do this job. So I stick with the plan as I played it in the audition, but knowing full well that when you get on the set, things could change drastically, and they have.
You have to be loose all the way through the process, don't you?
Yeah, especially if you're on a TV show where there's characters that have been in it, ongoing. You have to fit into their thing. You know what I mean?
Well, that's jumping onto a moving train, isn't it?
It is, and the bigger the show, the faster it's moving.
That is for sure. And have you ever been thrown by that? And if you were, did you have some technique for handling it?
I did an episode of Friends, and I was in it just for a very brief second, and everyone keeps saying, "Oh God, I saw you in Friends. That's the greatest." Blah, 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 blah. And I cringe. I just absolutely cringe, because it was a moment where I didn't do what I had planned to do, and I felt like I was intimidated. The stage was too big, and
the physical stage, or the stage of being on that show?
The stage of being on that show.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big stage. I mean, they were huge at the time. I couldn't have been more excited. In my acting for the camera class, I talk about all those things. So you show up, they give you the sides. The PA gave me the wrong sides. They changed the script, right? He comes to me with the new sides. And you're sitting around all day. I'm on the Warner Brothers lot, which I worked on tons of times. And I'm like, "Hey, how you doing? What are you doing?" "Oh, I got this part on Friends." "Oh my God, this is great." So it's like, shaking hands and, shucking and jiving for hours, right? And sitting in my trailer, this is before phones, so you couldn't play on your phone. You're just like, whatever. And, you're in wardrobe and the whole thing, and you're sweating and you're too cold and the whole thing. And then all of a sudden, less than an hour before I go on, he goes, "Oh, I forgot to give you these new sides." I'm like, "Well, when did they come out?" And he goes, "Well, they came out this morning." I'm like,
So what'd you do?
Well, it was no big deal. It was just a minor thing. But at first, and then I'm like, "Oh my God." So anyway, I had time to get over that. It was no big deal. But then everyone else, the other day players in the scene, had been brought in because a 3-camera show, they have a process where one day is rehearsal, the day before you shoot, right? So I didn't get brought in for that. So it was already blocked. And then I just walked in. They had a piece of tape there. The stand-in didn't even tell me which piece of tape was mine. So I think I was standing on Schwimmer's tape at first.
Oh,
Schwimmer wasn't real happy about that. And then, then it was just like roll camera. And I knew the first AD, just from being around, just from being on Warner Brothers. And I looked at him like, what the? And he just shrugged his shoulders like, welcome to the big time.
Did they push you around? They tell you what to do?
No, it was all good. It was just like, you want it's that search for a sense of control, because if you have your plan, you want to go in and you want to. Have you ever watched Barry?
Sure.
It just so much of it reminded me of Barry. I mean, Barry reminded me of it. Just all the weird things that happen that when you're sitting at home watching a show, you have no idea that this other show was going on. The better show was going on behind the camera.
Well, there's really, I can't think of too many businesses that are quirkier than the business of show.
Just
It is a lot of insanity goes on, and people have all their egos involved, and it can be quite challenging.
Yeah.
Have you worked for directors that gave you great direction?
Yes.
Share with us something that a director maybe said to you that you found extremely helpful, and maybe even were able to use it in other circumstances.
Well, Chris McQuarrie was really good on Jack
Christopher
Reacher.
McQuarrie, yeah.
He was great. He just really was. He just was so supportive, and just from the audition process on, you just like, and you kind of felt like you were working for a friend, if you like a business friend. And I never met him before that. So that was really good. And then Van Sant on Promised Land. I mean, he bought into me right away. It was just like, and I'm like, dude, you are who you are. And I'm like, and we're having a conversation, like a creative conversation. And I'm like, this is pretty cool. All right. So that was really good. And then
So you felt included rather than just some body that came in.
exactly. And so many times you are just that. You're just a body that comes in. But in those situations, that was pretty good. And
do you do anything now differently in going to a set than when you first started out? Do you treat the way that you go through the experience differently today than when you first were beginning?
yeah, I would say that, because of my look, I got into some situations where I think it would have been great if I had been more experienced. Now I have more life experience and more acting experience, and so now, I mean, my confidence level. If you're there, you're there for a reason. You know what I
Sure.
mean? So there's no reason to feel otherwise. And
Did you feel otherwise in the beginning? You felt like maybe did you have a little bit of imposter syndrome? Like, why am I here?
well, that's exactly what I was going to say. It's like I call it the fraud system, not imposter, but it's like fraud. It's like, who am I trying to kid? I mean, come on now. You were just like a year ago, you were a bartender, like all that kind of crap. You know what I mean? And it's
And you've stopped thinking that way. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, because it gets back to what you're saying before, is that you get smacked around, and then you either step up or step out. So yeah, so that's one of the reasons why I'm really looking forward to doing this play, because within the play, you're not a day player. You're just two guys, and you're one of them. You're 50% of the show, and that's going to be a really good and fun challenge, because it's all on us.
Sure. Well, you're the star of the show.
Yeah, exactly. So really looking forward to that. And that's one of the really good things about writing too, is that, I'm the star, but I'm creating the show.
Well, as many people have said, you're the god of that world.
Yeah, it's great. It's a lot of fun. And it's a lot of way to settle scores. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. Have you ever heard of a magazine? Bob introduced me to it. It's called Just Smile. It's not around anymore.
No, I've never heard of it.
I'm sorry. Stop Smiling. And it was a really, well-made magazine, great articles. One of the writers in this, he was a film writer, and I can't remember who it was, doesn't matter. But he said that it's his way of reliving all these experiences, only the outcome is more to his liking. Whereas in the real situation, he failed miserably. You know what I mean? He did something stupid and wrong and the whole thing. So now he's writing it and adding the pieces and the parts to make sure that whoever part he's playing in this whole thing comes out on the upside or differently, whatever it may be. And there's a certain level of insanity about that, because he obviously spent a lot of time reliving it and thinking about it and feeling guilty about it and not doing like the Friends story. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't think about Friends because I keep thinking, why did I do that?
You keep having little PTSD over your experience on
Oh my
Friends.
gosh. I have friends PTSD.
Friends PTSD. So I've been having this absolutely wonderful time having a grand chat about the business, acting, writing, and so on with Joe Coyle. And I'm just wondering, you have worked with and met lots of people in the industry at this point, and I'm wondering, do you have a story that you could share with us that's either weird, quirky, offbeat, strange, or just plain funny?
After you've been around for a little while, there's plenty of funny things that happen. But one of them is just a little bit. It's a kind of a business story. Is when I was working for George Clooney, I was his stand-in for many years on a number of movies, and one of them was Perfect Storm. And in that movie, the production, they built a giant tank on one of the stages of Warner Brothers, and they put a fake boat in it, and they created waves and wind and this and that and the other thing. So as a stand-in, you had to be like hanging from things and the whole thing. And so on this one day, I was pitching a script, and I actually got a meeting over at, I think it was Paramount, with a big development person. And so I said to George, listen, I'll only be gone for the morning. I had this meeting. He's like, oh, go for it, man. Have fun. Good luck. The whole thing. So I hustle over there. I go to the meeting, and it went well. Like everything else, everything feels like it went well until nothing happens. But nonetheless, it went well. And I came back and I'm feeling pretty good about myself. And, there's an ambulance there and this and that and the other thing. And I'm like, oh my God, what the heck happened? And they said, oh my God, I can't believe George's stuntman, Brad, he cracked his head open. I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, the scene, what George was on the, they called them the birds, the things that stuck out to the side that in heavy seas, you drop them down and it keeps you a certain level of balance, so you're not rocking all over the water. Well, they were testing the mechanism on it, and some air got in the system and it burped, so it jerked when it wasn't supposed to. And Brad, who was being my stand-in, the stunt double was being my stand-in. He's on the thing, and the thing jerked and cracked him in the head really good.
Oh, wow.
Blood, the whole thing, right? So, of course, I'm feeling guilty about it, and the whole thing was a big deal. The next day, Brad comes back with a bandage on his head, and George gives him a Rolex watch as a gift. I guess it's fairly common that these big stars, when one of their stunt guys gets hurt, they give them something. And so he gave him a Rolex watch, and it was from the year this guy was born, and it was like a classic Rolex. It was really cool. And on the inside of it, on the back of the face of it, it had an inscription that says, Brad, it should have been George.
Wow.
So
you would have had a Rolex.
Yeah, exactly. That's a G-rated George story. So
that movie was directed by Wolfgang Peterson, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Really good. Great. You talk about, the directors that by being a stand-in, and I tell this to everyone who's young, it's like, get in the game. I know you were told not to be an extra. You're told not to do this, and like, if that's your thing, then fine. But I'm telling you, if you get in as a stand-in, you are right there, front and center, especially for a star. You're front and center. You're standing there in every scene, every major scene. On either side of you is the director of photography, the first assistant director, the art director, stunt coordinator, if the stunt's involved. Every head of the department is standing around there as they're rehearsing the scene, and you're watching it just like they are. And then they say, okay, first team, relax. Second team, step in. You step in, you stand on the star's mark, and they light this thing, and you walk through it, and this, that, and the other thing. And you're seeing how this whole thing is set up and made. And every one of these major department heads knows your name on day two of like 65. Very few films last that long anymore, but 50, 30, 50, 60 days, you are there and you're the guy, and they all know you. They're calling you by your first name. You can't even remember all their names, and they know your name. And they're talking to you, and once they have confidence in you that you're not some, you're not, what's going on, you're paying attention, then you're getting all these tidbits from them of all these great little tricks of the filmmaking business. And it was just like, it was fantastic. I recommend anyone do that.
That is a tremendous piece of advice. I'm wondering, do you have any other solid pieces of advice or tip you might have for someone trying to get into the business, or maybe they're in a little bit and trying to rise to that next level?
Well, I would just say, well, perseverance conquers, first of all. So you have to have that, figure out a way to get in, be a good, dependable person in everything that you do, and bring all your life experiences to it, work hard and just be open to all the possibilities of the things that can happen. Now, if you're dead set on being an actor, then don't get waylaid into other things, because, you'll get used to the money. If you become a crew member and you start making that kind of money, it's very difficult to give that money up. So stick to your cause, whatever it may be, but work hard, be smart. And you just have to be driven, unbelievably driven. But that goes for anything. If you wanted to be a Wall Street guy and be one of those, masters in the universe, it'd be the same thing. If you want to be a professional athlete, the same thing. You just have to work and work and work and just figure out a way. But in the end, I think what the most important thing is your sanity. So if you're going into it to be famous, I would suggest don't do it. You become an influencer, whatever that is, and do, weird stuff on TikTok. If you want to be famous, go do that. But if you want to be really good at it, then I read something once that the guys who built the cathedrals back in medieval times or whenever, there was folks who went up there and built the gargoyles and the cherubs and the angels and the saints and things like that. And they're way up in the top, and no one really knows what they're doing, and who could tell whether they're doing a good job or not, but they obviously did. And so they weren't getting paid a lot of money, and there wasn't a lot of fame associated with it. So what drove them? And this person who wrote this article was saying they did it for the glory of God. Now, I'm not suggesting, I'm not getting religious here, but there's a higher power, a higher reason for you to do this. And if you can go and do what you do, and you do it for those reasons, and it works out for you, then you are one of the lucky few. If it kind of works out for you, you can make a pretty good living as an actor in television, film, as being a day player, being a character person. You can do that. But if you set your goal as I want to be a star, that is kind of a faulty way to go. And I know stars who have said to me in quiet moments, and one of them said, "It sucks to be me," because we were someplace that he couldn't get any privacy. And it was a situation where he wanted to be private.
That's the big trade-off, isn't it? If you're going to be a star, you're going to lose your anonymity almost assuredly.
Yeah, and what's the price? I don't know. Is it enough? Maybe it is. I don't know. But
well, you see some people handle it extremely well, and some people do not. I mean, your colleague George Clooney handles it extremely well, I think.
He does really well. Matt Damon does it really well. They're the two that come to mind right away. Super nice guys, and they're it looks like they've come up with some kind of work-life balance. And then, George, time stamping this thing once again, announced today this plan to kind of get them through the strike, where, he really going to, give some things up for the group, for the guild.
Well, for sure, George Clooney is a proven leader in the industry.
I just posted something on Facebook and I said, don't bet against George. And I believe that. I mean, he's a driven person, driven in all the good ways.
Well, that's everything that I've ever heard or read about him. Obviously, you know him personally. I do not, but everything about him seems like he is a very driven and very intentional human, and knows exactly what he wants out of life, and he keeps getting it.
Yeah, he's. I was very lucky to meet him, very lucky to work for him, and lucky to have known him. And his work is nowhere near done.
Oh, no. He's mid-career.
Yeah, exactly. He's really going to play a part in the future.
As a writer and a director and an actor.
Yes, absolutely.
And a producer, I guess, all four of those.
Yes, he's a talented person. By the way, he is far funnier than he's ever shown on the screen.
Oh, well, he impresses me as being a quite hilarious person, especially all the pranks he likes to play on people.
He's got a deft sense of humor.
I have no doubt that that's true. Joe Coyle, this has been an absolutely wonderful hour on StoryBeat today, and I can't thank you enough for sharing all of your wisdom and experience with the listeners today. So I thank you greatly.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want you to know I only got through one page of my notes, and I have got reams and reams of more notes here. So if you ever want to have me back, just let me know.
Will do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.